All right, folks, as you know, we've got the introduction to this section, to the Bible, and then I move into talking about the essays. If you do not feel that you need this, it's absolutely fine. You don't have to keep watching. This is simply if you feel like you want a step-by-step sort of like outlining of the essays, the GPB essays. So I do want to direct your attention to the PowerPoint really quick. If you move on, I left you with talking about the Nicene Creed, and then if you skip down a couple slides, you'll see this slide that has different pictures of Jesus, right? Different ways that Jesus has been represented, and you'll notice there's a black Jesus, there are tan Jesuses, there are white Jesuses, right? Jesuses that look like they're, from various places. Or at least are represented from various perspectives, although most of them are more white or tan, maybe even brown. Anyway, so this slide just trying to point out that there are 4 Gospels, because there are 4, at least, right, in the text, we're given 4 different Jesuses, and I would say 5 if you count the Apostle Paul, but we're analyzing them sort of to think more about the way in which none of them is necessarily right, and that all of them contribute to a better understanding of who this individual is, but also they contribute to our conversation about different perspectives, right? About global perspectives. I mean, even within this text, there's no one Jesus. We don't just see one Jesus. Again, this then also resonates with our thinking about how every single one of us has a different perspective, right? We all meet and experience, if we were to meet one person, right, we'd all experience them in some sort of different way. We would have a different sort of relationship with them, just like I have different relationships with each of you, right? And you have different relationships with your parents, on and on. You get what I'm saying? So then what I've done is I've sort of given you just a snapshot of what each of the gospel writers, the ways that scholars have looked at them and represented them, just from looking at their gospels and seeing the language they use and what seems to be their focus. And for instance, what you'll notice is with Luke, right, there is an emphasis on women, right? And often Luke has been called the gospel of women, and also to the poor, because he's centering those who are marginalized. And right, as you read, you can continue to think about that. Matthew, if you look at Matthew's gospel narrative, or excuse me, birth narrative, you'll notice that he emphasizes this a situation that is very similar to what happened for Moses, right? And that's because for Matthew, he wants to represent Jesus as Messiah, and Messiah in general. For Luke, Jesus would be a savior figure specifically for the poor and the disadvantaged, for women, again, those who have historically been marginalized. So you can actually look at those. I'm not going to go over them. I've also got a chart that kind of explains those differences, so I'll just direct your attention to that, and you can do it on your own. I've also got you some questions to really think about and compare those birth narratives with one another. If you'll turn to that next slide, or click to that next slide that says the birth narratives, I've given you a couple of narratives, Zoroaster and Muhammad specifically. I'd also like, if possible, for you to look up Siddhartha Gautama's birth narrative, and we're also going to be thinking about the birth narrative of Lord Lao, right? You had to read that in Bidlack's essay. So those, again, are in right, I said Zoroaster and the Honorable Prophet Muhammad. You can look those up and watch those videos or read those. That's also going to be important for your essay for this week, because I want you to think about Jesus' birth narrative in light of the birth narratives of other great teachers. And then also to think about then this prophetic paradigm that I think Greifenhagen is trying to get us to consider. The way in which Jesus, right, has some very similar conditions and attributes to other great teachers, gurus, spiritual leaders, savior figures, right? So just again, this slide, taking a look at this that says, that has that title, the prophetic paradigm, right? Jesus was, I have a bunch of questions for you to think about, but right, Jesus was a Palestinian Jew whose birth was announced to his mother by an angel. It was prophesied that he'd do miraculous things and bring the truth of God to humanity. And as a Jew living in the Roman Empire at the turn of the century, he lived among the most marginalized people, the same people to whom he would give hope in and beyond their oppression. So I want us to really think about who Jesus was and what he was doing, right? So we're not only thinking about Jesus as a savior spiritually, but I think if we're trying to really think about the context in which Jesus lived, the people of Israel, the people who called themselves Jews, were a persecuted people under the Roman Empire. And so Jesus's reign, right, Jesus's leadership, Jesus's even sort of like messianic status, they would have been thinking about literally a way in which God had brought him to deliver them, just like Moses. Remember when we watched that clip from the Prince of Egypt, and the people, as they were enslaved in Egypt, were singing "Deliver Us," right? It's the same kind of concept. These people were wanting an actual, a real savior figure to come and relieve them from the pain and oppression that they were experiencing as really as a colonized people in the Roman Empire. So what I want to do now is I want us to turn our attention to Greifenhagen's essay. And what Greifenhagen, once again, right, Greifenhagen, we've read a few of his essays, is going to really get us to think about what's happening in the Qur'an in comparison to what's happening in the biblical text, right? So he's specifically looking at Luke's gospel, and he's looking at these surahs in the Qur'an that are talking about the Annunciation, right? That are talking about Mary. And again, he's looking at Luke alongside these surahs because Mary becomes a focus in both of these, right? The angel, the Annunciation, the angel is speaking specifically to Mary, not to a man, right? This is, pretty... it's definitely uncommon in the Bible, right? And in the Qur'an, I think Greifenhagen is trying to sort of lift up these resonances so that we see similarities, but is also reading these texts together to also point out some differences, maybe some important differences. So we read both of those surahs. I don't need to go over those with you. You can read those yourself, and then we look to the similarities that Greifenhagen points out, right? Down at the bottom of the page, those similarities then would be that she responds with bewilderment. She's a virgin. Her virginity is no obstacle, for God is able to create a child within her without a human father, right? Mary devoutly accepts the message in both Luke and the Qur'an that God's Spirit brings to her. She'll be filled with God's Spirit and have this child. And finally, both of the fuller Quranic accounts of the Annunciation are preceded by the story of the Annunciation to Zechariah, who, interestingly, right, the male figure distrusts the announcement, right? But Mary, in both texts, this woman is able to accept this message. So now let's look at the differences, right? Greifenhagen makes that very clear. We're going to now move to the differences. The Qur'an, once again, as we know, not interested in details, omits entirely the sign of Elizabeth's pregnancy and any mention of Joseph at all, right? Joseph is insignificant in this story. The focus, again, on Mary. The Qur'an